just when I thought all was lost, you changed my mind. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You showed that we could learn to share in time. You and me and Rockefeller, I'll keep plugging on. Your face will shine through all our tears. And when we sing another little victory song, precious friend, you will be there, singing in harmony. Precious friend, you will be there. Why don't you sing along? The words are in your leaflet. Just when I thought all was lost, you changed my mind. You changed my mind. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You showed that we could learn to share in time. You and me and Rockefeller, I'll keep plugging on. Your face will shine through all our tears. And when we sing another little victory song, precious friend, you will be there, singing in harmony. Precious friend, you will be there. Sit on down. Thank you, Stephen. There is a magic to our lives. A beautiful, sometimes terrible, and always astounding magic. It is a magic of not knowing, and it is a magic of knowing all too well. It is the magic of meeting and of parting. Now, I say there's a magic to our lives because, frankly, I don't know any other way to describe it. To describe that when we meet the people who most deeply impact us, the people who most instinctively understand us, the people who it's like, in you my soul has found another home. For all our careful planning and the ways we cultivate the illusion of control of our lives, these most important moments of meeting, they always catch us by surprise. Some of the time, even though the moment shocks us, we know when it happens. In fact, we know because it shocks us. We see someone across a crowded ballroom and the lightning flashes between the Tesla coils of our hearts, and something in us knows that the other is a part of us and always has been. It must have been in Scripture what made Adam cry, "This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." We know in an instant that somehow this person will change our lives because in that moment they already have. But much more often, nearly always, we have no idea. Most often, those first meetings of the people who will be most significant in our lives come and go scarcely noticed. They are noticed no more than a single seed of a fistful cast into the waiting soil, not knowing that that one particular seed is going to be the one to grow into the tree that will give us shelter and shade and companionship for the rest of our days. There is a magic to our lives, a beautiful, sometimes terrible, and always astounding magic, a magic of not knowing and of knowing all too well, the magic of meeting and of parting. Because as much as we most often do not know those moments of meeting the people whom today we cannot imagine life without, we are so deeply, so painfully aware of the moment when our life moves on without them, when the person becomes only a body, when All that is left is the echo of their touch on our skin, the memory of their gaze imprinted on our heart. They become the voice message we just can't delete from our phone, or the clothes we can't give away because they still have a hint of their scent. The impulse to text them or call them or buy that thing we see that they would just love. The impulse that is just a fraction of a second quicker than the crushing remembrance that they are gone. Other than the moment of birth, we usually do not know the moments when we meet the most significant people in our lives, but we cannot escape the deep knowledge of the moments when they leave us. And whether we are by their bedside, our hand in theirs, or with our phones in our hands, hearing the news, the impact is the same, and that is that we will never be the same, that a piece of us has departed with that one we loved. And really, how could it not? Because there was a piece that from that very first moment was never just me or you or them. It was always us. And in their place is a hole somehow in the shape of that person that can never quite be filled by another, because nobody else is exactly that shape and size. And so we plug on with our lives, and we remember how to live and laugh and love and breathe. And we learn to go on with that piece of us, not gone, but somehow just somewhere beyond our grasp. And we long for the day of reunion when we are whole together once again. It was March 1940. Actor, activist, and musician Will Geer was performing at the Forest Theater in New York City. Geer had been active supporting migrant workers, and while touring camps in California, he had met Woody Guthrie, and the two had become friends in that struggle for justice. And so when Woody moved to New York that year, Will organized what he called a Grapes of Wrath concert. He took an off night on the Forest as a benefit for migrant workers and invited both Woody and his old friend Alan Lomax to play. And Lomax brought along a young friend of his, a 20-year-old banjo picker named Pete Seeger. It wasn't a bolt of lightning when Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie met that night. In fact, Pete said he was so embarrassed by how poorly he thought he'd played that he slunk away from the concert and didn't officially meet Woody until Lomax formally introduced them a few days later. It was one of those moments that changed music history that at the time felt like just another handshake, kind of like when Bono, Edge, and Adam Clayton showed up in Larry Mullen Jr.'s Dublin kitchen as teenagers, because the drummer had advertised at school for bandmates. And how could they have known that this would begin a friendship that 46 years later is still the heartbeat of U2? Or that night at 2/5 Park in Hollis, Queens, when Joseph Simmons and Darryl McDaniels first rapped in front of Jason Mizell, and the friendship that would become Run DMC was born. Or that day in Shamrock High School in Decatur, Georgia, when Amy Ray and Emily Saliers sang together in high school choir, with no way of knowing that a lifelong friendship and millions of Indigo Girls album sales were in their future. Or that day when you first met that person, you know the one, the person without whom your life would and will never be the same. Who is that for you? Well, for Woody and Pete, it was each other. Pete and Woody joined up with Millard Lampell and Lee Hayes and became the Almanac Singers. And if you haven't heard of them, that's okay. But their music, songs like Which Side Are You On and Union Made, became the soundtrack for a generation of the labor movement in this country. But even more than that, a friendship developed between Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger that would shape each of them for the rest of their lives. It wasn't just singing. Woody showed Pete, 7 years his junior, how to hitchhike and jump freight trains. And by the way, just so you can't say we never give you any useful information here at All Saints Church, the key to jumping a freight train, according to Woody Guthrie, and he would know, is you got to wait on the outskirts of town. And when the train is picking up speed but still not going too fast, you grab a hold of it and you swing yourself on. Of course, the first time Pete tried it, he fell down, skinned his knees and elbow, and broke his banjo. And he had to go to a pawn shop, hock his camera for a cheap guitar, and play that for the rest of the summer. But his friendship with Woody Guthrie survived that and so much more, because more than any of that, Woody and Pete did what all great friends do. They made each other who they would become. Woody had an unshakable conviction in the power of the people to make change for the better, and he met Pete at a time when Pete's faith in that power was ebbing toward despair. Pete's father had to resign his job because of outspoken pacifism during World War I, and that piece of who Pete was deeply impacted Woody, whose own father had been a Klansman in Oklahoma. Woody wrote on his guitar, "This machine kills fascists." And Pete answered, etching around the edge of his banjo, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." And as so often happens, one lived a long, long time and one died way too soon. Woody Guthrie was only 55 when he died of Huntington's disease in 1967. Pete Seeger would live 46 more years without his friend until Pete's death at the age of 94 in 2014. 46 years of a Woody Guthrie-sized hole in Pete's heart. 46 years of carrying on the legacy of his friend. It was 7 years after Woody's death that Pete wrote that song that we just sang, "Precious Friend," about the one he loved but saw no longer. It is a tribute and so much more. It is a song of grief and a song of hope, of that faith that is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Faith and hope that death is not the end, that though we are parted, we will be together one day, and that maybe, just maybe, we are still together now. I first heard Pete sing this song at a concert in August of 1989 during a tour he did with Woody's son Arlo. Another song Pete had written in the 1960s was called "Quite Early Morning," and one of the verses was, "And so keep on while we live, until we have no more to give. And when these fingers can strum no longer, hand the old banjo to young ones stronger." Pete and Arlo's tour was called "Precious Friend," and I think that was Pete's way of both honoring his friend Woody and living out those words of handing the old banjo to a young one stronger. And you could almost see and hear Woody on stage as Pete launched into "Precious Friend," and Arlo and Pete sang it in harmony. But that song wasn't done with me after the concert. A year and a half later, Steve, a friend of mine from our campus ministry group back in Columbia, Missouri, became very sick and went into the hospital. Eventually, we found out he had AIDS and was going to die, but I didn't find out until the very end because the family was so afraid of anyone finding out because of the repercussions in the small Missouri town where his father pastored, fears that were realized when, after Steve's death, word got out that it was AIDS that had killed him, and his church asked their grieving priest and family to leave. I had graduated college and was working at the Columbia Daily Tribune, and my days were getting up and going to work and going back to the hospital, leaving the hospital to go home and catch a few hours sleep, only to start over the next day. And the soundtrack of those commutes in my beat-up old little Nissan Sentra was Pete and Arlo singing this song. I guess you could say I was lucky that it wasn't until I was 22 years old that I first experienced death as something not just tragic, but profoundly unjust. The first time, but certainly not the last. And yet, as I drove the icy streets of Columbia, Missouri, and sang through my tears, I wondered if it was true. I wondered if when we sang another little victory song, "Precious Friend," would you be there singing in harmony? Or would there just be my own voice echoing in the winter silence? I remember the day we buried Steve's ashes in the frozen ground of Calvary Episcopal Church's Memorial Garden, and I looked over and I I saw his friend Tanya standing off by herself with tears rolling down her cheeks, and I thought, this must be what the women at the foot of the cross looked like. The grief, the pain, the despair, the loneliness. You know what I'm talking about. And that image jolted me. That image reminded me that Christ is not apart from the pain, that Christ is in the midst of the pain, the grief, the despair, the loneliness. Reminded me that even though most of Jesus' friends had fled, there were a few incredible women who had not, and they were grieving and despairing, but they were doing it together. And Christ was there. And in that moment, I knew that I had a choice. In that moment, I knew we had a choice to despair alone or to go on together. And so, Robin, I remember you grabbed my hand and we went and stood next to Tanya. And we stood together with Tanya, with Steve's brother Andrew, with Katie, with Gretchen, Suzanne, Chris, and everyone else who had a Steve-sized hole in their heart that day. We stood there and we wordlessly covenanted to go on, not without Steve, but still together with him, and Christ was there. And that when we sang another little victory song, our precious friend would be there, singing in harmony. Our precious friend, he would be there. Grief, faith, and hope are not opposing forces. Grieving is a deeply faithful act because when we grieve, we trust or even try to hope that there is a love strong enough to hold us in that kind of vulnerability. And it is that grief and that faith and that hope that draw us together this day. It is that grief and that faith and that hope that gives our community the name of All Saints Church, all saints living and dead singing together in one chorus. It is that grief that we feel all too keenly and the faith and hope that sometimes we can only find in each other that draws us to this ofrenda and to this table. And that draws us together to sing not just a requiem for the dead, but a requiem for the living. Because we have all been there, and we are there now. We all have precious friends, children, parents, mentors, and lovers who came into our lives just when we needed them, whether we knew it or not, who loved us enough to give us hope, not just the old soft soap. And showed that in a world where we grasp on so tightly to what we have in fear that we could learn to share in time, you and me, and who knows, maybe even Elon Musk. And yet every year, doesn't it feel like the struggle gets harder and harder? Not just the struggle to be apart from these ones we love, but to continue the struggle we once shared to make the world a better, more just, and more joyful place. We look at the news and look around us, and too often our victories seem too sparse and the forces of fear seem almost overwhelming. Year after year, election cycle after election cycle, war after war, police shooting after police shooting, deportation after deportation, Supreme Court ruling after Supreme Court ruling, and now even pandemic wave after pandemic wave. We get more and more tired. And this ofrenda gets more and more crowded with the faces of precious friends who used to give us comfort in moments like this, who gave us hope that sometimes now we struggle to find. And so we come together on this day in grief and in faith and in hope. And together we join hands and we gaze into each other's eyes and we listen. And if we listen closely, I swear we can hear them and we can feel them. We can hear the echo of voices long silenced and the touch of hands long returned to the dust. And together we keep plugging on and their faces shine through all our tears. And when we sing another little victory song, our precious friends, they will be there. So if you come here this morning with a friend or a lover or a child or a parent-shaped hole in your heart, If you come here this morning looking at the world around us and wondering if you can carry your grief and fear to make it through just one more day, if you come here this morning wondering if there indeed is hope or if all is lost, then let's do what we need to do. Let's do what we always do. If you have a hole in your heart this morning, let us bring it together to the foot of the cross and sing. Play it, Stephen. Just when I thought, everybody, all was lost, you changed my mind. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You showed that we could learn to share in time. You and me and Rockefeller, I'll keep coming on. Your face will shine through all our tears. And when we sing another little victory song, precious friend, you will be there, singing in harmony. Precious friend, you will be there. On your feet if you're able. Let's sing. Just when I thought all was lost, you changed my mind. You gave me hope, not just the old soft soap. You showed that we could learn to share in time. You and me and Rockefeller, I'll keep plugging on. Your face will shine through all our tears. And when we sing another little victory song, precious friend, you will be there, singing in harmony. Precious friend,